Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to show you how to make some simple wheel chocks using leftover wood. Let's get going.
The first step of this project was to cut out the plywood template. Now I did this on the bandsaw and I'll talk you through the design of how I made the template in a minute. So up here on the wall is a couple of designs I had for the original chocks. However, this one here doesn't have a curvature, so it doesn't fit the wheel radius. And then these were just different iterations of different lengths. I opted for the curved one, which looks like this, and I've extended the 150 so it's got a bigger, thicker section here, which I'll show you in a template. But this is the rough sort of guide, which is what I started with.
Now with wheel chocks there's a variety of different angles and sizes you can use. My main criteria here was that it would follow the wheel radius, which would stop it slipping. So that's all I did. So what I did was cut the surface here to match the wheel radius of the tyre, and then made sure that there was enough surface at the back to be able to grip onto it, and enough contact surface with the ground so that it wouldn't slip or slide during holding for the wheel chock.
So what I did was create a paper template. So here's the one that I did, and you can see all the different lines I was experimenting with. And then all I did was went and made it on a piece of plywood. So we've got this thin, about 9mm piece of plywood, which I cut the template out on. And then we're going to go and transfer this to the wood that we'll be using for the project. So this is the piece of wood I've got for the project. As you can see, it's got a lot of dirt on it, paint and other rubbish, but it's perfect for making this, and I can sand it off if needs be. But we'll cut all these templates up. So these are just to match the distance here. So they're approximately 200mm in length. And then we can cut out the extra bits afterwards. So we're going to go and chop this up on either the chop saw, or I might do it by hand. We'll see how it goes. So let's go and chop this up now. I then cut the pine board to size on the bandsaw.
Well, rather annoyingly, the camera decided not to film for a few of the cuts of this, so I only got the last two cuts, but the principle is exactly the same. All I did was cut these to 200mm long, got 5 for the first chop, and then a further 5 for the next chocks. They're not exactly 200, they don't need to be. I was going to do them on a chop saw, as I said, but the blade on that is a bit too thick, so I decided to use the bandsaw instead, as it's got a very thin blade and it doesn't need to be particularly accurate. So what I'm going to do next is glue them up. I think I'm going to have to do them in 2 stages, because if I do it as one big block, I might not be able to get it underneath the bandsaw. I'm going to have a look and see if I can, then obviously I will, but it's probably easier just to do it in 2 separate bits, to be honest. So let's go on with that. Now the problem with doing it like this, where I cut each one, is that every time I do this, there's going to be some level of inaccuracy cutting it. So I think I may end up gluing 2 together. I might try one and see, and if it is accurate enough and repeatable, then I'll keep going with that, as it's the quickest method and saves a lot of time in the long run. Now for the end of the chock, I'm going to use some of this rope. This was left over from a previous commission, so we can just drill it in, and then that will act as something to pull, which will help with keeping the chocks easy to use. So it'll probably be screwed in and just drilled in as well, which should keep it nice and stable in the chock, but we'll see how that goes.
I then used the plywood template to mark the pine boards. As you can see, this was a fairly repetitive process, and I just used a Sharpie so that the line was nice and easy to see on the bandsaw. As you can see, I did end up using a bandsaw to chop all of these blocks out. Now this did take quite a while, but that was mainly due to the bandsaw blade being a bit blunt, and also the fact that they were quite sharp curves to cut with quite a thick blade. Luckily, once I got into the rhythm of this, it didn't take very long. It probably took me about 5 minutes to chop all of them out, which I don't think is too bad. So I've glued up the first chock, so I'm going to let this dry and then we'll make the next one. I then glued up the second chock, again using Gorilla Wood glue, and making sure to apply a lot, just to make sure that all the surfaces were fully covered in glue. I probably used a bit more than I needed to, but I wanted to be safe and sure. I then clamped it all up, trying to make sure that all the surfaces were nice and aligned, which would just make me have less sanding to do later on. Now I did do a dry fit off camera just to ensure that it all fitted together nicely, and it did, so now you can see I'm just putting all the clamps on. I think I ended up using about 10 clamps, which again was probably a bit excessive, but I wanted to make sure it was all clamped together. I then used my random orbit sander to sand over all the surfaces.
Now with the wheel chocks, I was going to use rope on the back just to help with pulling them out from behind the car. However, during testing, I found this wasn't necessary, as I could get a hand's grip behind it. Secondly, some wheel chocks have rubber or a plastic surface on the underneath for grip. I didn't find this to be an issue, and they didn't slip at all. So that's the reason that I've omitted using rubber. I was going to use some old bike tyres that I had lying around, but I didn't find it necessary, so I'm not going to implement that to that. I did consider adding some slots into here just to help with grip, but I didn't find this to be an issue during testing. These held the car perfectly fine, and I don't think I need to add anything else for furthering grip. Thank you very much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoyed making these wheel chocks. It wasn't particularly complicated, but it was just something fun and got me back into some woodworking again. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.